Welcome to another episode of Chax Chat. Join Chad Chilius and me, Dax Castro, where each week we wax poetic about document accessibility topics, tips, and the struggle of remediation and compliance. So sit back, grab your favorite mug of whatever, and let's get started. Welcome, everyone. My name is Dax Castro, and this week's episode of Chax Chat is sponsored by CreativePro. In fact, Chad and I are speaking at two upcoming CreativePro events that you should know about. The first one is CreativePro Week, which is July 8th through the 12th in Washington, D.C., and it's live streamed online. So CreativePro Week is an essential event for design professionals who use InDesign, Illustrator, Photoshop, and PowerPoint. Chad and I are presenting several accessibility sessions at CreativePro Week. So if you're anywhere in the DC area or you can get there, this is a great opportunity to meet, learn some good skills, get your questions answered. And the next event is October 8th through the 11th for the 5th annual Design and Accessibility Summit. And Chad and I have actually been tagged to be producers for that event. And so we are putting together all the speakers, and I can tell you this lineup is great. You are going to be so enriched and fulfilled by attending the Design and Accessibility Summit that's happening online, right? It is an online event, October 8th through the 11th. So head on over to creativepro.com to get more information about those two events. So today we don't have Chad. So that's why you're like, wait a minute, where's my normal intro? Where's my that same banter that we have back and forth? But the great thing is we have with us a special guest, Kristen Witucki, who is a content creator at Tamman, and she is blind, so she is a native AT user. And welcome to the program, Kristen.
Thank you so much for having me, Dax. I really am honored to be here.
Awesome. Well, we wanted to have you on the podcast because, you know, as content remediators, our job is to make sure that that content is accessible for people who use assistive technology. And we know that not everyone who uses assistive technology is blind, but we tend to think of that as the base level of who we're doing this work for. And we wanted to have you on the podcast because as a sighted person, I can only approximate what that experience is like. I can say, well, I think someone might use bookmarks more than a TOC or vice versa, or that they're going to want to interact in a specific way, but it's only my guess. And so while we have you on the program, not as speaking for everyone who is blind, you and I have worked through a couple documents already kind of offline as we've been partnering with Tamman, and your perspective is really interesting to me. And I wanted to have you on the program to kind of talk through a few things. So welcome to the program.
Well, thank you. And you both are excellent approximators of the experience. So I really appreciate all the work you put into learning it. So
awesome. Well, I think part of it goes to the fact that I know that Chad and I both use NVDA and JAWS on a daily basis. And so when you start using it on a daily basis, just because you don't have sight doesn't mean you don't really you aren't considered a native AT user. I probably use it about an hour or more a day, I would say, on average. So
that's the way to build up any, language proficiency or AT proficiency.
Yeah.
That's great.
Well, Chad is a Duolingo guy, man. He is always on that Duolingo. So he is constantly learning new language, and he's doing really good with his Spanish. So
I am going to talk to him about that then. So cool.
Yeah. So I wanted to ask you, we as remediators, we get this question a lot. How do I know what settings that I should have in my NVDA or JAWS when I'm testing my document so that I can approximate what another person's experience might be? And we always tell people to leave things at the default setting because while some people may have certain customizations that we can't adjust for every one of those. And so I wanted to ask you, what are some of the things that you've customized in JAWS or NVDA? And first of all, maybe which one do you use on a regular basis?
I use JAWS. I need to meet NVDA David sometime soon, or Mark. I don't know. Liza was telling me about the banter of the different voices. So, but JAWS has a lot of settings you can customize. I would say one that I would not change if you were new to AT is the speed. But right. I definitely speed it up. As you get more and more comfortable with it, you can listen faster and It saves time, which is amazing. One thing that you can change if you're new to assistive technology is the voice. I think you should change the voice to whatever's comfortable for you. I personally have it on the least human sounding voice because when I first started using it, so I'm 40 in my 40s, but I started using it in high school, and I was like, I cannot stand these half human sounding or like almost human sounding. I think it's called the uncanny valley effect or something.
Sure.
I couldn't take the uncanny valley. And so my screen reader is very robot. So I don't recommend that for people who are scared of a screen reader or just want to feel comfortable. I recommend doing the opposite. Find a voice that you're like, oh yeah, I understand this voice.
Well, I have quite a few voices, and in fact, with JAWS, what people may not be aware of is you can actually tell it to use one voice while you're in a document and one voice for another voice for the operating system. And I think that's a really great benefit because then if I'm not really sure what's telling me, what the prompt is from which side of the equation, it makes it nice because I do use a British voice for inside the PDF, and then I use a female voice for the Windows environment. So for me, that's just helpful. And I will tell you, my speed right now is, and I use NVDA, so it's a little different, but I have rate boost on, and I am at about 35.
Nice.
So I've passed all the way through the normal 0 to 100%. For those of you who don't know, NVDA has two modes. It has normal speed, and then it's got what I call warp speed. And so when you get through, you start out at like 25 or 30% on regular speed. And as you progress, you'll get to a point where 100 is just not fast enough. And so you can turn on, it's called rate boost, but I call it warp speed. You turn on warp speed, and then you have a whole nother 0 to 100 you can go to. And so I find it's comforting because I'm getting, my comprehension is getting more and more and more complete, rather than it's just, I'm not just hearing the vocalization, I'm actually understanding what's being said. So
I find it fascinating that your document voice is British. So you're, anything that's badly labeled or something that you're remediating or just not tagged well, you get this British accent telling you about the problems. That's amazing.
That's true. I think I just find it very eloquent and official, I think is my thing.
Yeah.
Right. So what are some of the settings that you have customized? Not necessarily what people might want to do, but what are the ones that you have customized?
Well, the speed is the big one. I turn off all the tutor messages because at some point it's sort of like, I wasn't actually trying to do that. Don't tell me to do something else, So I have those turned off. They can be useful. There are different kinds of messages you can leave on or turn off in JAWS. So there's like messages for access keys and messages for menus, things like that. I do still have it on beginner verbosity. And I haven't really played with intermediate or advanced, but part of it is just that I like to edit, and I'm always aware of, if there's a post with a misspelling or a little punctuation deviation or something, I like to be aware of those things. So I don't skip out on that.
Well, it's interesting, we tell people, we get a lot of math documents where there are tables with lots of data in it. And one of the things that we know is that people in certain mathematical worlds, usually banking worlds, they put negative values inside parentheses. So rather than having a minus sign, they use parentheses. And what's interesting is if you don't have the verbosity or the speech mode set in your screen reader the way it needs to be to hear those, they don't get voiced. So you have no idea if the number is 126, that's a whole, 126 million. It's a whole difference between negative 126 million and positive 126.
Very different scenario.
Yeah. Awesome. So, so speed and verbosity, anything else?
I think that's it. The voice, like I was saying, I have
and
it
the
very
voice,
robotic.
Right?
Yeah. But definitely when you're starting out, pick a voice you love and you go with it.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, my Siri is Irish, for example. So.
Yeah. Oh, really? See, I can't do Irish. I can listen to a lot of languages, a lot of dialects that I just understand.
Yeah.
But Irish and Scottish, to me, you might as well be speaking Mandarin Chinese because
Nice.
my brain just has a really hard time processing the words because they're just similar enough, but just different enough to really throw my brain off.
It's true.
Yeah. So one of the other things that we wanted to talk about was that, a lot of people think that every AT user is an expert, right? That just because you have to use this every day, that you must be really good at it. And there's a feature that I always talk about. There's a way in JAWS, it's not in NVDA, but in JAWS to set an anchor point. So let's say I have a document that has a footnote, but it doesn't have a reciprocal link. So I can put a marker in JAWS and say, okay, this is remember this spot. I'm going to click on this link and go somewhere else in the document. Yeah. And then I can recall that and come back to that exact spot, whether the PDF had that feature in it or not. And I've often talked to people who are native AT users, and they're like, I had no idea that feature even existed.
Yeah. And I knew there was something kind of similar in Word, but I haven't played enough with Adobe. So definitely. Yeah. So true. Yeah. I think everyone is on their life journey, and sure. I have a lot of experience with AT. And then there are always new commands coming out and new features, some of which I try and some of which I don't. And also there are just different fields. Like you need certain commands for different fields. The great thing about AT is you can learn like 4 commands and get a lot better at it than you were when you started and get pretty far. So
yeah, I agree.
You don't need to know everything.
Well, and that's what I tell people who are trying to test documents. They're like, oh, I can't test a document with a screen reader. That's too complicated. Can you hit the down arrow?
Right.
Can you press the H key?
Yes,
the H key or G. I mean, it's not, for those of you listening, the most, I think the biggest barrier to people using assistive technology is, or at least JAWS and NVDA, is understanding how to turn it off, how to silence it momentarily. They install JAWS or NVDA, all of a sudden it's talking all this stuff and everywhere you move your mouse. So one of the first things we teach people is that for NVDA, it's insert S that toggles the speech mode to on, off, or beeps. And then with JAWS, that is insert space bar. You wait for that little click and then you press the S. So almost the same, but a little different. And then the other one we teach people is to turn mouse tracking off. In NVDA, you can tell NVDA to stop voicing everything my mouse touches. So that way it's a little bit less of a in your face experience, right? Listening to all those words versus, now I can purposely walk through the document. Once you learn those things, and then we teach that the shift key is the stop NVDA temporarily, like it's speaking and you just want it to shut up right then. Yeah. Because it doesn't actually have a function for any other key. Most every other key on your keyboard does something. Shift really doesn't do anything. So it's nice that you don't accidentally jump to the next page or the next graphic or something.
And control in JAWS, will it tell it, shut up, JAWS? Like just for a second.
Awesome. So control is the same kind of way. So awesome. Yes. That's really great. So can I ask you then, how do you prefer to walk through a document? You've got a document you've never seen before, and you're wanting to get an idea of what it is, or, walk me through the way that you kind of approach a document.
So if there's a table of contents, that's always helpful to just get an idea of the information and maybe even the structure. And then headings are super, super important to me. I feel like if there's no heading, I already start to go, oh no, here we go. Especially if it's a big document. Headings really provide that outline level that I don't really care about anywhere else, and sometimes probably don't write as well as I enjoy to read. But yeah, headings are super important.
So question about that. So we actually, for those of our audience who are new to the podcast, we have a Facebook group called PDF Accessibility. And someone recently just said, hey, I have a TOC in my document. Do I need to make it hyperlinked? Do I need to make it active? Does that fail accessibility? Does it fail PDF UA or fail Section 508? My answer to them was no, it doesn't. It's not required to be a link, but I got to believe, Kristen, that if your first first inspection of a document is, does it have a TOC? That
right.
having links would make it really helpful for you,
links
right?
Links are really a nice perk to have, I think, because it's somewhat of the equivalent of people who don't use AT being able to jump around a document really quickly. So yes, I agree.
On the topic of TOC, there is a bug within the JAWS and NVDA where, well, it's not really a bug. I would say it's the standard and the reality are kind of at odds with each other.
That's true.
So in PDF UA, it says your TOC should have a very specific tag structure, but JAWS or NVDA both will voice the word link when they get to a reference tag. And then they will voice the word link again when they get to a link tag. But in a TOC, the proper structure is TOCI, reference, and then link. So for you, if I do it properly, you're going to hear link every time you walk through that TOC. Is that something that you consider a barrier or just an annoyance, or you don't really even notice it? What are your thoughts?
That would be an annoyance. And actually, it makes me think that if the TOC is not active, then that's why sometimes it can seem like it is and it actually isn't. So
okay,
I'd much rather have link and have an active TOC and just be annoyed.
Gotcha.
But that is interesting.
So your answer is, well, some accessibility is better than no accessibility, right?
Yes,
I'd rather have it be active and say link than not active at all. So
yes, exactly.
There's a simple fix for that, but what happens is that you have to go into each TOC item and change the parent tag from reference to paragraph, and then you only hear the one link. But it's kind of a pain in the butt to do, and if you're not using a tool like Common Look or Access PDF, it's a little harder. It's a little bit more of a manual process to kind of find those and make all those changes. So, I want to ask you, so you start out by looking at the TOC, then you go to the headings. There's a feature that for whatever reason, I just thought was so useful, but I find most people who are assistive technology users don't really use it. It's the elements list. Do you ever use the elements list?
No, I do not.
That's so funny.
I don't know if it's just because I never had a good explanation of what the elements list does. But yeah, I'll tend to go through by a specific element like headings or maybe the links list. Sure. But no.
So for those of you who don't know, the elements list is insert F7 on for NVDA. I'm not sure what it is for JAWS, but the elements list in NVDA only lists the links and headings. So it will give you a list of all links or all headings. There's a radio button at the top. When the screen opens up, you either can radio button to links or radio button over to headings. And then it will list all the headings kind of in an outline mode for you to navigate to. And you can then navigate directly to them from that elements list. Now, in JAWS, it's much more powerful because it lists links, graphics, headings, tables, anything that's identifiable lists. It has a very robust way to kind of parse through the document. And I always thought that was could be very helpful to get a sense of the structure of a document. But I don't think I've ever met a person who uses AT, and I've asked that question. They said, oh yeah, I use that all the time. I think almost nobody uses it.
Maybe it's just needs a publicity boost. Like here's how this can save you some time, or
that's true. That is true. All right. So let's see. So another thing that I wanted to ask is, we as remediators think that there are certain elements like footers, like footnotes and endnotes that are problematic and cause grief when it comes to people who use assistive technology. What are the top things for you? I know you've already mentioned kind of if a document doesn't have headings, that's a really big, big barrier for you. What are some other things that are major barriers in documents that you find?
Well, I just think it's fascinating that I don't have as strong of a background in Adobe as I do. I would say Microsoft Word is probably the way I create docs the most. And then Google Docs is a great way to collaborate with people. If there's something that I'm writing by myself before I show it to people, I write it in Word first and then I'll throw it in Google. And I guess my biggest frustration from that perspective is just that when I finally translate it to a PDF, some of the great tagging I have done does not come across along with it.
No, that is a problem, right? So from a content creation standpoint, Google Docs does not export tags at all. In fact, you have to use a third-party plugin called Grackle Docs, and it works okay, but it's not, not the best thing in the world. But you spend all this time in this live environment. You're like, heading level 1, heading level 2.
I made this accessible, I swear.
Well, and that's what a lot of people don't know as an organization. If your whole organization is based on Google Docs and now you've got to make all your deliverables accessible, you have just created a mountain of work for yourself because of the program you chose, right? We talk about Canva all the time, the same kind of way. Canva cannot make an accessible document. In fact, I was working with someone this morning on a PDF and they're like, I can't get this list to separate correctly so that I can tag the number as the label and the text as the text. It just doesn't want to tag correctly. And of course, even before I looked at where the document was from, I said, I bet it's a Canva document, huh? And they said, yes, it is. It's because of the core structure behind that document that it kind of wants to glue the wrong things together. And so as remediators, we have a really tough time kind of separating those things back out. And, we know that Canva is on a journey for accessibility. They're trying to get things to be better. And in some areas, like their Canva, their slides, they are okay. But most people are using Canva to create full-on documents, real 8.5 by 11, handouts and things. So caution to everyone. Make sure if you choose a platform, you test it to see if it can export your content accessibly. It's a huge roadblock if you kind of commit to one thing and realize it doesn't produce.
Yeah. And then I guess another issue from a document reading standpoint is it's always good as the user or as a reader, and of course you don't always have time, but to take the time to go through the reading settings in Adobe and make sure that they're, and it's really funny how sometimes just infer a reading order from the document itself works better, and then other times left to right, top to bottom, reading order works better. I just think that's hilarious. Depending on
what's interesting is you only get that when it's an untagged document. So so when you open an Acrobat document and it's not tagged at all, Acrobat says, hey, there are no tags in this document.
Right.
We're going to try to read it for you. Which method do you want us to use? And kind of go there. I will tell you that I used to be the biggest deterrer of using auto tag features in Acrobat, but I will tell you, I auto tagged the document last night with form fields in it, and it did a great job.
Nice.
I would love to see Adobe give that feature to someone using assistive technology to say, hey, this document doesn't have tags. Do you want us to try to auto tag it and see what we get? Right. Yeah. And so I think that would be a huge feature, because right now, if you want to auto tag a document, you have to know to go into the tags panel, create a root tag, and then tell it to auto tag versus, walking through it kind of more in a discovery kind of way. So
yeah. And I think once it allows people who use AT to auto tag, I don't know, then the possibilities really open up for, being able to correct things and fix things. We were
that's a little harder though, because if you don't have sight, you can't tell if something's incorrect, right?
Yeah.
If this thing is marked as a paragraph tag, you can't tell that it's actually the title of the document or the heading of this section. So that's always the drawback. We get people from time to time who are blind who say, hey, I'd love to get into document accessibility and making documents accessible. And I say, well, you can, but it's kind of a caveat. You have to have a sighted person to work in tandem with, so you can report what your user experience is, and then they can look at the things that are on the page and say, okay, does the user experience match the visual, information that's there?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, Liza and I had a fun one where the alt text wasn't translating to JAWS for a photo, but it was to NVDA.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Wow.
And then she showed me how to get into the tags tree, and then I went in, and apparently the photo had some kind of photo ID because when I did it from Google, I went into insert image, inserted the source file, blah, blah. Anyway, at some point along its journey, it had an image ID. When the image ID number was removed, it read the description. So I was like, what? Anyway, just one of those wild things that happen.
Yeah. Well, what's interesting is I would venture to say that it might have put that ID in the actual text field. And so it was reading that. So when you have alt text and actual text, two different fields that really should never be together,
an option,
the actual text field will always win over the alt text field. So you're like, hey, why am I getting this ID? So it was a matter of how it exported. Without seeing it, I can't say for sure.
Yeah.
That's just my speculation.
Yeah.
So as we close out this episode, I want to ask you if there was one thing that people could focus on, making sure they get right in their documents when they're considering people who use assistive technology, what would it be? What's the one thing that helps you the most? What is the one thing that you're like, man, I am so tired of this thing being wrong every time I open a document?
Well, I mean, just start somewhere might be my first thing.
Okay,
because there are amazing number of documents still that start nowhere, and you open them and I have no idea what it says. So I feel like, I mean, Marty always calls it progress over perfection, but even if you don't have the document 110% of the way there, at least start it. Do something, and it will make it more readable.
Well, the basics are headings, use styles to make your headings correct, right? And describe your images. If you can do those two things, I gotta believe that's a huge improvement over no tags at all, right?
Yes. Yeah, I would say that's, I don't know, maybe 70% of my reading experience or something. Maybe not that much, but certainly if you have headings and then labeled graphics, it's like, oh, I know how this goes and I can understand it. So then other issues become much smaller. So.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Kristen, for taking the time to join us and really give your perspective on documents and the journey with assistive technology and kind of what those barriers are. We appreciate you.
Thank you. I look forward to learning more from you as we work more together. I really appreciate talking to you.
Awesome. And for those of you who don't know, Tamman is the organization that is now the parent organization of Chax Training Consulting. While we are still the same organization, we now have the mothership, which is Tamman Inc., and they do accessible apps, websites, and programming for accessibility. So, if you're interested more about information, head on over to tammaninc.com, TAMMAN Inc.com. So once again, we want to thank our sponsors for this podcast, which is CreativePro Week. If you are in the DC area or you want to go to DC, feel free to go over to CreativePro and look for information on the CreativePro Week, which is going to be packed with so many powerhouse speakers, not just on accessibility, but on photos and documents and InDesign and Photoshop and Illustrator and all sorts of great stuff. And then, of course, the Design and Accessibility Summit happening in October, which is an online event. If your company isn't willing to pay for you to go fly somewhere, it's a great way to spend a few days, it's actually 4 days, to listen to some amazing content on accessibility all over the gambit. We're going to have a bunch of HR stuff this year where we're focusing on organizational, maybe not HR, but focusing on organizational accessibility. How do I start an accessibility program in my organization? What should I consider from an HR standpoint? Lots of different things. So be sure to join us for that event. Again, both of those conferences can be found at creativepro.com. So once again, thank you, Kristen, for being with us. We really appreciate you.
Thank you, Dax. Thanks for having me.
My name is Dax Castro, where each week we unravel accessibility for you.